attuned with that.
Let me go back a bit in history.
Okay.
To set this modern understanding of human behaviour that's coming from understanding the brain in context. If we go back into the middle part of the 19th century, no, let's jump further back. Let's go back into the 1400s, 1500s. The explanation for everything is God. I'm talking from a Western world perspective. But the same would be true around the world, that the understanding of the world is that somehow the gods or a god or something divine inspires it. And you've got very little control of it, but you try and do a number of things to try and make a relationship with either God or the gods. In the middle of the 17th century, what was called philosophy, which is coming from the ancient Greeks and is the way of using words to try and understand things. Philosophy begins to be called experimental philosophy because a change is happening in the way people are thinking about the world. In England, it's Newton. Newton's laws, if you've done physics and so on. Yeah. And Newton and his colleagues in the middle part of the 1600s begin to understand that the world has got laws by which it runs. And if you can systematically explore the laws, you can develop something called science, which is knowledge. So philosophy becomes experimental philosophy and then becomes physics. And it's an attempt to understand and then hopefully manage the way the universe works. This is about the physical world, not about the human world particularly. In the 19th century, there's a very curious science develops called phrenology. Have you heard phrenology? P-H-R-E-N-O-L-O-G-Y. Phrenology.
It comes up a lot in Victorian literature.
In Victorian literature. And the idea is that you can tell a person's character by the bumps on their head or the shape of their skull. And there are wonderful manuals that are produced at the time. One that I remember particularly describes the shape of a skull of a man who would not make a good husband. It's a completely false science, but it was very, very popular at the time. And so phrenologists, we had a great engineer whose French father, Brunel, Marc Brunel, dug the first tunnel under the Thames. And his son was called Isambard Kingdon Brunel, and he made the great railways, the Western Railway, and some of the great bridges in England. We're talking about the 1850s, 60s. Anyway, when the son, Brunel, was aged 12, he was taken by his father to the most important phrenologist of the day. The father was a great engineer. The phrenologist had the wisdom to say, from the bumps on your boy's head, it looks like he might become an engineer. Very clever. Anyway, bit by bit, at the end of the 19th century, we see a body of knowledge developing, which is called psychology. And one of the main sources of this is a man called Freud. And I think what Freud was really doing was taking the ideas of phrenology and putting them inside the head, because he was fascinated by what he called the unconscious. And he developed a method of treatment called psychoanalysis, which is a very long and very expensive treatment. If you do it properly, you go and see your psychoanalyst for an hour every day, 5 days a week, for a period of time. in one of my marriages, my wife was a psychiatrist and she was a psychoanalyst. And she had been going for her training 5 days a week for 5 years. And I said one day, I'm very surprised that your psychoanalyst, your therapist, has not invited your husband to come and have a session. And she said, but you are with us every time we are there. Which is a typical psychiatrist answer. Anyway.
Can I just ask a quick question there? Yes. So how connected or separate are psychoanalysis and therapy?
Well, psychoanalysis is the original psychological therapy, but it developed. It's recently been discovered that a lot of Freud's writings about his clinical work are made up. I won't go into the whole history of that, but it's very extraordinary. But what Freud developed was a kind of a priesthood. You could only become a psychoanalyst if you'd had training by a psychoanalyst who had originally been trained by Freud. And it becomes a very, very proud is not quite the right word, supercilious. Psychoanalysts think that they know more than anybody else because they've got access to the unconscious. But actually, the brain doesn't work the way Freud thought it worked. So psychoanalysis is dying out at the moment. But it's interesting that it's lasted 100 years, because what the 20th century begins to be fascinated by is human behaviour, not just the physical world, but human behaviour. And so psychology develops. Have any of you done psychology at school? Okay. The problem with psychology is that it's not a true science. If you look at the definitions, it likes to be called the science of the mind or the science of human behaviour. But it's not a true science, it's a set of descriptions. So there are 50 main theories, actually 54, main psychological theories in the 20th century. Take your choice. If psychology really was the science of human behaviour, there should be a psychologist on the board of every major company, because what are companies about? They're about human behaviour. There's an accountant on the board of every company, an engineering company, they're engineers. Marketing is a better science because it experiments all the time. But psychology, one psychologist says one thing, another says another. Psychologists never got together across the Western world to agree anything. What is a person? You'd think that would be a really fundamental question for psychology. But one theory says this, another theory says this. So it produces lots of academic journals. It keeps psychologists very busy, but actually no conclusions. What is this extraordinary thing called the self? We all have a reference inside ourselves to myself. And we project myself so that other people, you recognize your friends because they have a consistent. Or you can sometimes say, oh, that's not like Leon. That's not like Will. You're a bit surprised by something. Okay? You may say the boyfriends that are attracted to you, you may say, oh, it's just another of those. You see boys being boys. Boys actually don't see girls being girls in the same way. It's quite interesting.
I think we'll need to hear more about that later.
So psychology never agreed anything. Well, in 1980, we had the first working images of the brain. University of Aberdeen in Scotland produced work that originated largely in America, but it produced the first black and white, grainy images of the brain in a live person. We go back to 1900, the first X-rays. Think of the extraordinary thing that suddenly medicine could take a photograph of a broken limb and could work out how to put it together. Before that, you could only just feel it and try and push it back together. So the extraordinary change in medicine when you can X-ray. I've got a very creaky chair, I'm afraid, and it's okay. It's not doing it when I anyway.
Is it around? Do you change your mind? Because mine is silent.
We'll see. It's suddenly stopped.
Maybe it wasn't yours.
So we get the first grainy images of the brain, 1980, and the technology improves bit by bit. And by the beginning of the 20th century, the technology is beginning to be amazing. If you go back in the whole of history, people have been able to look at the brain when they'd got it out of the skull, after people were dead. And there are wonderful drawings. Leonardo da Vinci, the great Italian artist of the 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci does wonderful anatomical drawings of the brain. But the question of what does the brain do was a quite different question. So structure, you can look at it. And when I first met the brain, when I was a clinical student, we were having a lecture on the brain, and a technician came into the lecture theatre. He was carrying a tray, big metal tray. There was a white cloth with a hump in it. He put it on a desk like this. He took the cloth off, and there was the first brain that we'd ever seen. And by the side of the brain was a big knife. And it so happened I was sitting at the front. He handed the knife to me, and he said, "Cut." And the only way we could understand the brain was looking at it. You couldn't actually get access to the way it worked. So a dead brain doesn't tell you very much about how the brain works. In about 1860, the date is not exactly right, there's a horrible accident on a railway line in America. Phineas Gage?
Yes.
Well done, good. There's a railway foreman, aged 24, and in order to create the railway line, they're blasting rocks out of the way. And to blast a rock, you put a hole in the rock, and you put in gunpowder, it's called black powder. Somebody tamps the powder down, then you put a fuse in, you all get a long distance away, you light the fuse, bzzz, the thing blows up, and then you clear the rocks. Well, Phineas Gage was tamping this down, and the iron rod that he was using made a spark when it struck a rock. And it pushes the bar through the left side of his head, out of the top. The bar is 1.5 meters long, metal bar about that thick, and it lands 30 feet away. A huge explosion, and he stays conscious. Amazing, amazing. It comes here, and it comes out of the front of his brain. Now, his personality changes. He was an extremely effective 24-year-old foreman on the railway. He becomes alcoholic, he loses his marriage, he becomes unpredictable, he can't save money, and he goes off to Peru and becomes a coach and horses driver. But he starts having fits. And about 10 years after his accident, he comes back to America, and 2 years later, he dies. But they preserve his skull. The physicians who have been interested in him ask his family if they can keep his skull, and it's still in Harvard Medical Museum. The fascinating thing about it is that it turns medicine's attention towards what do bits of the brain actually do. Because a penetrating head wound of this kind and the person surviving, very rare at that period of medical history. And because his personality changes, medicine begins to be interested in how does the brain manage personality and everything else. It can't get many answers until we're able to image the brain in real time. So it takes about another 120 years, up to 1980. Okay? Psychology tries to find out, but psychology can only do it at second hand. It can't get at the brain. It can only try and do experiments which it assumes the way the brain works. There is a great French scientist, philosopher called René Descartes, or Descartes. Okay? Okay, very good. Descartes, among many other things, coins the phrase in Latin, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Okay? He actually publishes it in French first, and then it becomes. Anyway, I think, therefore I am. And that is what powers the search in science from the 1600s onwards.
The age of reason began.
It's the age of reason. The age of reason, absolutely. And so the Western world has rather thought that we manage ourselves by thinking. But what the 21st century has told us, now that we understand the brain somewhat better, though we're actually at the point in science where we know that we don't know, okay? But that's an improvement. What the 21st century is telling us is that our thinking system is there to tell us about what the brain already knows. If you think about the logic, you could not have a thought unless the thought already existed. You can't think about nothing. Okay? So this is an amazing shift in our understanding. Our thinking system is there to give us an account. We are the only animals, so far as we know, that have got an adaptive language. And so we try and put words to our experience to make sense to ourselves of what we're trying to make sense of. And the better our language, the more refined our language, the more refined our feelings, the more subtly we can see the world. Okay? And we try and convey that experience to each other, but you can't do that with a dog. A dog can hear the tone of voice. A dog can look into your eyes, and it can access the middle part of your brain because you are accessing the middle part of its brain. You're communicating in the limbic system, the emotional centers. And there the dog with its tongue hanging out, your pup is thinking she's the food provider, but they can't actually say to each other at the end of the day, what kind of a day did you have today?
Yeah.
Okay?
How would you rate that food today?
How will you rate, and was she kind to you, or she, So this discovery that the brain works bottom upwards through its emotional system is an extraordinary discovery, and is perhaps the most important discovery of the 21st century in terms of thinking about how we as human beings function, that everything goes through our emotional system, and all our decisions are based upon the emotions that are attached to experience, that are attached to words by which we make sense. We've never been able to say that so simply before. So it's a very exciting point in knowledge that we're at. So that's the answer to the first question that you sent me. It's only taken about 20 minutes. Which is, I think, the most exciting discovery of the 21st century is the understanding that the brain works upwards through its emotional system. So if you remember the video that we did last time, there are these, if you can think of a line going in here and lines going in here, where they meet is where the amygdala are, inside the kind of inner surface of your temporal lobes. And these amygdala are like unbelievably sensitive radar system. They're checking all the time for what's happening out there, what's happening in terms of the emotional system. And their primary task is to make sure that anything that is fearful is registered very fast, and then to mobilize the system. But it's actually tracking all emotional inputs all the time, and then putting them on the pathways that it was responsible for carving when you were day 1, day 2, day 3, right up to age 24.